What really happened behind Jungkook's happiest smile, and why did Park Hyung-sik suddenly mention Taehyung in a way that left ARMY completely silent? That question exploded like lightning across a clear sky in the fandom, shaking timelines, igniting theories, and rekindling a curiosity that had long been hiding behind speculation. No one was truly prepared when a confession emerged so calmly, delivered almost in an academic tone, yet striking emotions with unexpected force. ARMY did not expect it, not because the story was simple, but because of its depth. Because Taehyung's role, long overlooked, turned out to be the key behind Jungkook's happiness ahead of a major tour, and because Park Hyung-sik, known for his careful and measured words, was the one who chose to lift that veil for a long time, Jungkook's happiness has been something ARMY watches closely. Every laugh, every small gesture, every glance that seems lighter than usual is analyzed, interpreted, and linked to countless possibilities. Yet there was one period that felt different, a phase before the tour began, when Jungkook appeared not just excited, but genuinely happy in a way that was difficult to explain. That smile was not explosive or dramatic, but calm, steady, like someone holding a beautiful secret close to his chest. Many wondered what changed, what happened behind the scenes. The answer, it turns out, did not come from Jungkook himself, nor from Taehyung, who is known for keeping many things hidden behind his composed expression. Instead, it came from Park Hyung-sik, an actor known to be close to Taehyung, a friend within a circle of trust rarely opened to the public. When he mentioned Taehyung in the context of Jungkook's happiness, not merely as a fellow group member, but as someone who had prepared something very seriously, the atmosphere of the conversation instantly shifted. Park Hyung-sik's words sounded simple, almost like a footnote in a long discussion, yet their meaning expanded like an echo in an empty room. He did not explain details explicitly, nor did he lay out a clear chronology, but his choice of words suggested careful planning, deep consideration, and a major surprise prepared before the tour began. At that moment, ARMY began to realize that Jungkook's happiness was not accidental, not merely the result of pre-tour excitement, but the outcome of something meticulously arranged by Taehyung. Imagine that moment. Before the stage lights turn on, before thousands of cheers fill the arena, there is a quiet space where emotional preparation takes place. It is in this space, according to Park Hyung-sik's subtle revelation, that Taehyung took on a role rarely seen. He was not just a colleague, not just a friend offering verbal support, but the architect of a surprise with one clear purpose: to make Jungkook feel calm, valued, and ready to face the immense pressure of the tour. Why did this feel so shocking? Because until now, public narratives have often focused on stage dynamics, on visible chemistry, on spontaneous moments captured and shared. What Park Hyung-sik revealed shifted attention to something deeper, more personal, and perhaps more honest. He implied that Taehyung worked quietly, thinking through small details that cameras would never capture, yet which Jungkook would feel profoundly. In the context of Korea's high-pressure entertainment industry, a tour is not just about performing on stage. It is a physical and mental test, an emotional marathon demanding consistency, resilience, and stability. Jungkook, as one of the central figures, carries an extraordinary weight of expectation. So when Park Hyung-sik hinted that Taehyung prepared a major surprise before the tour began, many began to read this as an effort to create an emotional anchor, something Jungkook could hold onto when tired, uncertain, or overwhelmed. Taehyung's silence during that period now seems to carry new meaning. Every moment when he appeared more reserved, more focused, is now reinterpreted. Were those the times he was planning? Were those moments spent ensuring that the surprise would truly hit the right emotional note? Park Hyung-sik did not answer these questions directly, but that is precisely where the power of the story lies. The hints he provided were enough to spark imagination, enough for ARMY to piece together fragments into a larger picture. What makes this story even more emotional is how Jungkook's happiness manifested afterward. He never explicitly said, "I'm happy because Taehyung did this." Yet the change was palpable. The way he laughed more freely, The way he spoke about the tour with a more optimistic tone, the way he approached rehearsals with steady energy, all of it is now seen as a ripple effect of a surprise that likely happened far from the spotlight. Park Hyung-sik, positioned as a close outsider, became a bridge between a closed world and public curiosity. He did not betray trust, did not expose secrets recklessly, but offered just enough context to show that the bonds within BTS are not merely professional. There are layers of empathy, care, and emotional planning that rarely find space in headlines. AS Army began to realize this. Reactions varied. Some were moved to tears, others stunned, and many admitted they finally understood why Jungkook's happiness felt different. Conversations shifted from what the surprise was to what it represented. How Taehyung, in his own way, chose to become an emotional pillar. Not through grand words, but through quietly planned actions. In a world that often celebrates big gestures in front of cameras, this story offers another perspective. That the most genuine happiness often comes from unseen care. That the greatest surprises are not always the most visually spectacular, but the most emotionally precise. And that a person's role in another's life is not measured by how loudly they speak, but by how deeply they understand. As the tour approached, pressure mounted, schedules grew tighter, and public expectations peaked. Amid it all, Jungkook stepped forward with a smile now understood as the result of a process. Taehyung, according to Park Hyung-sik's hints, had ensured that before Jungkook stood before the world, he first stood firmly within himself. Was the surprise a personal message, a carefully arranged moment of togetherness, or something entirely unexpected? Park Hyung-sik chose not to reveal the details, and perhaps that is where its beauty lies. The mystery remains alive, leaving room for interpretation while preserving the sanctity of the moment. What is clear is its impact, and Jungkook's happiness stands as undeniable proof. Now, every time ARMY revisits footage from before the tour began, every smile from Jungkook carries new meaning. Every calm gaze is read as the result of sincere care. And Taehyung's name, mentioned briefly by Park Hyung-sik, will forever be associated with an unseen yet decisive role. In the end, one thing becomes clear. Jungkook's happiness was not a coincidence, nor merely the effect of stage euphoria. It was the result of a major surprise prepared with heart, of Taehyung's quiet role behind the scenes, and of Park Hyung-sik's revelation that opened many eyes. And perhaps the remaining question is no longer, what was the surprise, but how many more stories like this exist behind the scenes, stories of care, friendship, and happiness, waiting to be understood more deeply? Because if one revelation alone could shake ARMY like this, who can say there are no more secrets? Secrets of attention, companionship, and quiet devotion, still hidden, waiting for the right moment to surface and change the way we see everything? The resonance of that revelation did not fade after the initial shock. Instead, it lingered, growing heavier with time, as ARMY began to revisit past moments with a new lens. Scenes that once felt ordinary suddenly carried emotional weight. Jungkook's quiet smiles in behind-the-scenes footage, his calm tone during interviews before the tour, even the way he stood beside Taehyung without excessive gestures, all of it began to feel intentional, layered, and deeply connected to something that had already happened but was never meant to be explained. What Park Hyung-sik indirectly revealed was not merely a story about a surprise, but about timing. The decision to prepare something meaningful before the tour was not accidental. It was strategic, emotional, and profoundly human. Taehyung understood, perhaps more than anyone else, what that tour would demand from Jungkook. The exhaustion, the pressure to meet expectations, the responsibility of carrying fans' hopes across continents, all of it loomed ahead like a storm. And before that storm arrived, Taehyung chose to create a moment of warmth, something grounding, something Jungkook could carry with him even when the stage lights dimmed. This is where the story quietly shifts from curiosity to something almost philosophical. In an industry driven by schedules, metrics, and public perception, there exists a parallel world where emotions are managed just as carefully as performances. Taehyung's role, as hinted by Park Hyung-sik, belongs to that hidden world. It is the world where support is not reactive but anticipatory, where care is expressed not after exhaustion hits, but before it has the chance to take hold. Jungkook's happiness, then, becomes more than a personal emotion. It becomes evidence. Evidence that someone saw what was coming and chose to act. Evidence that behind the polished image of global superstars, there are still moments of vulnerability that require protection. And evidence that Taehyung's understanding of Jungkook goes beyond words, beyond what fans are used to seeing on screen. As the tour officially began, many noticed how Jungkook carried himself differently. There was intensity, yes, but also balance. There was passion, but not the kind that burns too fast. Observers noted how he recovered quickly after demanding performances, how his energy seemed steady rather than erratic. These observations, once discussed in isolation, now connect back to that unseen preparation. Whatever Taehyung had done, whatever surprise had been given, it appeared to have fulfilled its purpose. Park Hyung-sik's involvement in this narrative is equally significant. His choice to speak, even indirectly, suggests that what Taehyung did was not trivial. It was meaningful enough to be remembered, meaningful enough to be referenced, yet sensitive enough to remain largely private. That balance speaks volumes. It implies respect for Jungkook's emotions and for Taehyung's intentions, while still acknowledging that something important took place. The emotional reaction from ARMY did not stem solely from curiosity about the surprise itself, but from recognition. Many fans saw reflections of their own experiences in this story. The idea of someone preparing emotional support before a difficult journey resonates universally. It reminds people of quiet friends, unseen sacrifices, and care that does not seek recognition. In that sense, the story transcends fandom and enters a more universal emotional space. Taehyung's silence following the revelation only deepened the impact. He did not confirm, deny, or clarify. He allowed the story to exist exactly as it was, fragmented, suggestive, and deeply personal. That silence felt intentional, almost respectful, as if acknowledging that some things lose their meaning when explained too fully. The power of the moment lay not in details, but in intention. Jungkook, too, never addressed it directly. Yet his actions spoke in ways words never could. The way he looked more present on stage, the way he interacted with members, the way he spoke about the tour as a shared journey rather than a burden, all of it suggested a sense of emotional security. It was as if he had been reminded, before everything began, that he was not alone in carrying the weight. As time passes, this story will likely remain without a definitive conclusion. There may never be a full explanation of what the surprise was, how it was delivered, or what words were exchanged. And perhaps that is precisely why it matters. In a world oversaturated with information, this moment stands out because of what it withholds rather than what it reveals. The legacy of Park Hyung-sik's words lies not in the facts they disclosed, but in the emotional truth they exposed. That behind Jungkook's happiness was intention. That behind Taehyung's quiet presence was action. And that behind the spectacle of a global tour was a deeply human effort to protect someone's heart before asking them to give everything to the world. In the end, ARMY may continue to speculate, to imagine, to wonder. But one thing feels certain now. Jungkook's happiness before the tour was not accidental, not superficial, and not fleeting. It was built carefully and quietly, by someone who understood that sometimes the greatest gift is not what happens on stage, but what happens before the curtain ever rises. And as the tour moved from one city to another, that quiet preparation seemed to travel with Jungkook like an invisible companion. Long flights, rehearsals that stretched late into the night, the physical toll of repeating perfection over and over again. None of it disappeared, yet something about the way Jungkook endured it felt different. There was a steadiness that could not be rehearsed, a calm that did not come from routine alone. For many watching closely, it felt as if he had already made peace with the journey before it even began. This is where the emotional gravity of Taehyung's role becomes impossible to ignore. Preparing a surprise before a tour is not simply about celebration or excitement. It is about acknowledgement. It is a way of saying, without speeches or public declarations, I know what you are about to face, and I want you to remember this moment when things become heavy. That kind of foresight requires intimacy, not romanticized intimacy, but the deep familiarity that comes from years of shared experiences, shared pressure, and shared silence. Park Hyung-sik's brief but impactful mention of Taehyung did something unexpected. It reframed the narrative of happiness itself. Happiness, in this context, was no longer spontaneous or fleeting. It was something cultivated, something protected. It suggested that within BTS, emotional well-being is not left to chance, but sometimes entrusted to those who know when to step forward and when to remain invisible. As fans revisited old interviews and footage, patterns began to emerge. Moments where Jungkook glanced toward Taehyung before answering difficult questions. Instances where Taehyung stood close without drawing attention, offering presence rather than performance. These moments had always existed, but now they carried new meaning. They were no longer just signs of closeness. They were echoes of something that had already been given, something that had already strengthened Jungkook from the inside. There is also something profoundly symbolic about the timing. Before the tour, before the chaos, before the demands multiplied, Taehyung chose that window to act. Not after exhaustion set in, not after cracks began to show, but before. That choice alone speaks volumes about emotional intelligence. It reflects an understanding that support is most powerful when it arrives early, when it prevents damage rather than repairing it. The absence of details continues to fuel discussion, but it also protects the purity of the moment. Fans may imagine handwritten words, a private conversation, a carefully planned experience, or something entirely unexpected. Yet the form of the surprise matters far less than its effect. Jungkook's happiness became quieter, deeper, and more sustainable. It did not flare up and fade. It stayed. What makes this story linger is not drama, but restraint. No official statement followed. No confirmation was offered. Taehyung did not turn the moment into narrative capital. Jungkook did not transform it into content. Park Hyung-sik did not revisit or elaborate. Everyone involved seemed to understand